Well, hello, and welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show. My name is Chris Curran. I produce podcasts for companies, and I teach at Podcast Engineering School. Every week on this show, we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. We alternate between interviews with podcast producers and engineers and daily goody episodes like this one, where I'm going to talk about actually today, 9 of the Daily Goody blog posts that I write every day. So, actually, I don't write them every day anymore. I think 3 times a week. And you can actually sign up to receive these daily goodies via email. You can receive it daily or as a weekly roundup. And you can sign up on the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. But today, I'm just going to talk about 9 of these daily goodies and a couple other things. And every other week I interview someone cool, so that's always really fun. So first of all, next semester of Podcast Engineering School starts on January 12th, 2021. Yeah, starting to sound futuristic here. January 12th, 2021. So the daily goodies we're going to cover today are from between August 14th and September 3rd of this year, 2020. And let's get in on it. Okay, so first one is gain staging with plugins. Gain staging with plugins. Okay, so gain staging is a very fundamental concept in audio engineering, and it has to do with, the signal flowing between hardware, between software. Basically, the audio signal comes from somewhere and it goes to the next thing in the chain, right? So if you think about a microphone, the signal comes out of the microphone and it has to go to the preamp first, right? And so then you crank the level up with the preamp, and then it flows from the preamp to the wherever it goes next. Maybe it's an EQ, or maybe it's your audio interface or whatever. And so usually going between these different stages, you can adjust the gain. And what happens is if one of those gain adjustments is really off, maybe it's cranked up so much that it ends up distorting the audio, that's not good, because you can distort the audio in one step, and then in the next step, you can turn the level down, but the distortion is still going to be there because you already distorted it in the previous step, basically. So that's what gain staging is in general. There's more to it. But gain staging with plugins is actually important as well, because when you use plugins like EQs and compressors and things like that, let's say you're using 5 plugins, well, the signal travels through the first plugin first, then it leaves the first plugin and goes into the second plugin, and the same thing, it leaves the second one, goes into the third one. So if one of those transitions is not correct, maybe the level's really low or really high, you're going to try to compensate that in the next step, and it can cause problems, it can cause distortion, it can cause noise, because let's say going from step 1 to step 2, or in this case, from plugin 1 to plugin 2, let's say the level coming out of plugin 1 is really, really low. So when it gets to plugin number 2, you have to crank up the level. Well, guess what? Now you're cranking up not only the level, but all the noise, right? That's in the signal. So to gain stage things properly, each step of the signal processing needs to have the right input level set and the right output level set. And that way, the signal will travel through all the processors and it'll remain at the optimum level all the time at each step. So anyway, that's really important. And one thing is, if you're ever hearing distortion on your signal, you can just go through your signal chain and see maybe on one of the steps you're cranking the level so high that it's distorted, right? And anyway, that's one thing you can do for troubleshooting. So gain staging, and I'm just saying it again and again because every time I say it, Ralph M. Rivera has to drink. So gain staging. And by the way, please comment on this episode with 2 words, gain staging. All right, let's move on to the next daily goodie, which is a 6-point soundcheck list for internet guests. Yeah, a 6-point soundcheck list for internet guests. So anyone who's recording podcasts over the internet, should walk their guests through this 6-point list. And it's a daily goodie from August 17th. You can see it. And by the way, I link to all the posts in the show notes here. So wherever you're listening, you'll see a bunch of headings and links, and you can just, go to each of these daily goodies that I'm talking about directly. So what's in the 6-point checklist? What are the 6 points? Well, number 1 is to have a strong, reliable internet connection. Pretty obvious there, but let's not forget, sound checking a guest is really important for the simple fact that most guests, they don't know anything about audio. They don't know anything about computers. They don't know anything about any of that stuff. And we shouldn't expect them to. So the podcast host or the engineer needs to make sure that all these guests have a good setup, that they have a good sound, good internet, and make sure everything is in place so that they can record a nice conversation, right? So number 1 is a strong, reliable internet connection. Number 2 is ask them to restart their computer if they haven't done so recently, usually that day. I ask them, have you restarted your computer today? And if they say, no, my computer's been on for the last 17 months, I never restart my computer. Well, then I always tell them to restart and then only open the applications that are necessary for recording. Number 3, be in a quiet room, right? Turn off all fans or air conditioners. If there's a window there that's open, close the window. Ask the family to be quiet, right? If there's family in the house, just quickly go tell everybody and say, look, I'm about to record a podcast, so everyone, if you could just keep, not make any loud noises for the next hour, that would be great. And anyway, that goes a long way. Number 4 is microphone technique, which basically means having their mouth consistently close to the mic when they're speaking. So I usually just remind folks, hey, look, make sure when you're talking that you're near the mic, you stay very close to the mic. And that's if they have a real microphone. A lot of people have earbuds, which leads to the next one. Number 5, earbuds, make sure they're not rubbing or flapping around. This is actually one of the most destructive things that a podcast guest can do. If they have earbuds and the earbuds are rubbing against their shirt or flapping around or rubbing against their hair, sometimes the ladies with the long hair, it rubs against the hair and it makes the sound that you cannot remove. It's terrible. So make sure if someone has earbuds that you teach them how to make sure it doesn't rub or flap around. Number 6 is sit quietly in one spot. Don't move around. Don't make any sounds like clicking a pen, tapping your foot, or slapping papers down on the desk. You really have to tell people just to calm down, sit down, don't move around, and don't make a bunch of noise. Because again, people, they don't know. Average people, they don't know these things. And so anyway, that's a 6-point sound check list. Hope that's helpful. All right, let's move on to the next daily goodie, which is leaning back from the mic when laughing really loudly. Leaning back from the mic when laughing loudly. All right, well, this is just part of microphone technique. So basically, microphone technique says stay a consistent distance from the mic at all times, unless, and there's two things here, unless, number 1, if you're going to say something really soft and quiet, then you can actually get closer to the mic. Like right now, I'm a little bit closer to the mic, a little bit closer. And anyway, I was talking very, intimately, right? Softly. You can, if you're going to speak softly, you can get closer to the mic. And conversely, number 2 is if you're going to say something loud or laugh really loud, move a little bit away from the mic. So, so I laughed, but I moved and I threw my head back. So that's just mic technique. That's what that is. So you can, you can remind guests to do this. You can practice this yourself, just for your own better mic technique. And the whole reason for good mic technique is because you don't want to laugh really loud directly in the mic, because that will actually startle the listeners, or it can startle the listeners, right? Because it'll be loud. If you laugh really loud right into the mic, that's going to be loud. And so the listener's it's going to hit them hard, and that's jolting, and that's jarring, and you don't want to do that to the listener. So now in post-production, yes, you can use compressors and you can do all this stuff, but nothing beats good mic technique. If you have good mic technique, you can still use compression and it'll even sound way better. So you can't rely on compression to fix all these different nuances of mic technique. It just doesn't work. You can help it. You can fix it a little bit, but good mic technique is always way better than using a compressor. But of course, you should do both. Have good mic technique and use compression, right? Okay, so the next daily goodie. Oh, this was a video. This is a video I made. How to use plugins to automate and improve your sound quality. How to use plugins to automate and improve your sound quality. So again, the link to this video will be in the show notes here. So how long is it? I forget how long it is. Oh, it's a 21 minute video. So I go over a bunch of stuff. It's a pretty cool video, actually. So anyway, check that out. The link is in the show notes. Let's move on to the next daily goodie, which is non-destructive audio editing. Okay, now for me, when I first got into digital, recording and digital editing and all this stuff, this was back in the late 90s. And this was after I had already been, engineering music in the music business back in the studios. I had worked in some big studios and worked on some records, right? I got a bunch of album credits. I've told you that many times. So when I got into digital audio and editing and stuff like that, when it came to multi-track, I always assumed that any editing that I did in the multi-track was going to be non-destructive. And what non-destructive means is that, let's say you have a multi-track session with, let's say 4 people are on a podcast. So you have 4 tracks in your multi-track software. Whatever it is, Adobe Audition, Reaper, Hindenburg, Logic Pro, whatever your DAW is, right? Let's say you have 4 tracks. And let's say you clip out a minute of conversation. Let's say someone had to leave for a second and then they came back. And so you could delete 1 minute of conversation. And then if you really wanted to restore that 1 minute or bring it back, it's still there. So when you remove that 1 minute, you didn't delete it from the source files. You just deleted it in your DAW, which is great, because then in your DAW, you can do anything. You can mess around, try this, try that, do anything you want. And if you screw something up, you can always get back to where you were, basically, right? So that's non-destructive editing. And now, once I got into podcast production, I heard and I realized that a lot of people are using Audacity, and Audacity is a destructive editor. When you make edits in Audacity, if you cut out 1 minute and then you save that, that's it. You can't get the 1 minute back. So anyway, you just have to be aware of that. And by the way, if you are using Audacity, what I highly recommend, and you're probably already doing it, when you do anything in Audacity, right? First thing you have to do is make sure all the original recorded files, all the original recordings are backed up. And what I suggest doing is make a copy of those original recordings and bring the copies of the originals into Audacity. And then go nuts, right? Do whatever you want. And if you screw up, you will always have the original raw recordings there. And by the way, this goes further than Audacity as well. This is just in general, whenever you're doing anything with audio, when you record an original file, you should always keep that original file and never edit it or adjust it or process it. Don't do anything. You should always have a backup of all the original files and then make copies of them and then do whatever you want. But you need the original files always, at all times. And so if you are using Audacity, which is destructive, make sure you have backups of all the originals and never touch the originals. Don't even bring the original file into any audio program. Well, I guess if you're using Reaper like I do, or any DAW that's non-destructive, I do bring in the raw files because it's non-destructive. Reaper leaves the original files the way they are, and it just makes a copy for Reaper, and Reaper does all that in the background, right? And so do most DAWs. Audacity's the only one I know of that is destructive. All right, let's move on. And I'm psyched today because I don't know if you know, in this episode, I'm actually covering 3 weeks worth of daily goodies. Normally I do 2 weeks, but then now that I went to 3 daily goodies a week, that was only 6 daily goodies I was covering. So for a few of these daily goodie episodes, I'm going to cover 3 weeks, and so that'll be 9 daily goodies. So that's what we're going to do today, 9. All right, next one. Mastering plugins I like. Okay, so I made a post here about the various mastering plugins that I like. And of course, the mastering step is like the final step where you add a little more compression, maybe slight EQ, very slight EQ. Or I don't even use EQ in my mastering step. Basically, I just use compression. And I like Aquamarine 4, which is a plugin. Dual stage compressor, Aquamarine 4. Sometimes I use Ozone 9. And sometimes I use the Abbey Road TG mastering chain. And sometimes I will use Saturn 2 from FabFilter to add some saturation. And now, actually, since I wrote this post, I bought a bunch of new plugins from Plugin Alliance. And I have the Shadow Hills mastering compressor, Class A, which is just an amazing compressor. And a few others, which I'll talk about soon. But yeah, the mastering plugins. Anyway, these are the mastering plugins I like. And don't forget, this is huge. Don't forget, you can use any plugin in your mastering step. So if you have an EQ or compress, anything, any plugin you own, you can put it on your master bus and use a little more compression or use a little EQ or use a little saturation. So for instance, if you're a podcaster who uses the Sheps Omnichannel plugin from Waves, which is a great plugin, you can use that Sheps Omnichannel on each voice in the episode. And in addition, you can use the same, a different instance of the Sheps Omnichannel on your master bus and add a little more saturation if you want, or a little more compression, just a little. Anyway, the link's in the description if you want to see the post and click through to the plugins I just mentioned. Let's move on to the next daily goodie, which is True Peace of Mind for the podcast editor, producer, and engineer. True Peace of Mind. What is that? What is True Peace of Mind for the podcast editor and producer and engineer? Okay, I'm just going to read this because it says it nicely. Well, I wrote it nicely, I guess. The vast majority of podcast episodes, once published, will be available to the public for many, many years in the future. Therefore, when a podcast editor or a producer or an engineer is careful enough and professional enough to produce very good sounding audio, he or she can sleep well at night, knowing that every single listener who hears that audio in the years to come is guaranteed to have an excellent listening experience and be able to enjoy the content without being distracted or annoyed by bad audio quality. I mean, isn't that great? Like when you produce good audio, it's going to be good forever. So someone 5 years from now who goes back and listens to an episode that you produced, they're going to have a great listening experience. And I don't know, for me, that's true peace of mind. That means that if I do it right, it's out in the world, it's correct, and everyone can enjoy it. And that's it. I love that. I don't know. I don't know why I love that, but I just do. And the last line of my post here is, I believe audio production is important and influential. Yeah, audio production is important and influential, and that's why I cringe every time I hear anyone who's a so-called podcast expert saying that, oh, don't worry about the audio quality. Just start your podcast. Just start your podcast. Your voice needs to be heard. Don't get caught up on the technical stuff. No, you need to at least get involved in the technical aspect to make sure you're not recording garbage audio, okay? It needs to be good enough. Doesn't have to be the best in the world, but it has to be good enough. So, and that means you have to technically produce the audio properly. So anyway, that's a tangent I've been on a million times. All right, the next daily goodie, and by the way, I have a couple extra things I'm going to mention after we get done with the daily goodies as well. So the next one is ground loop hum eliminator. So sometimes when you connect various audio equipment, like maybe you have an audio interface and you probably have a computer and you might have a channel strip or something or another piece of audio gear like a mixer or a Rodecaster Pro or something like this. Whenever you connect various audio equipment together, there's always a chance that there might be a hum that's introduced that's coming from like a ground loop or a ground hum or something like that. And there's been various ways you can try to eliminate things like that in the studios. And me personally right now, I often use a ground lift, which lifts the ground connection and gets rid of the hum. But some people really think that's bad because, your equipment is supposed to be grounded. Your equipment might break or it might malfunction if it's not grounded properly. And in all my experience in audio in over 30 years, that's never happened to me. But I guess technically speaking, it could happen. So anyway, what I found, because I wanted to recommend something to people who have a ground hum. And I'm like, well, if I can't recommend a ground lift, because if a bunch of people online are going to be whining about it, how technically it's not the perfect best way to solve the problem, which again, technically they're correct. I'll give them that. But the real world is often different than some technicalities, right? So I went out and I found something that apparently everyone says is really good. And it's this EBTech Hum X ground line voltage filter. Whatever, the link's in the post. You can click through. But this is an actual device that apparently it's sort of like the ground lift that I use, but it's technically better and it reduces the chance of harm to your electronic equipment. So I would say this is something, if you're producing a bunch of audio and maybe have a bunch of equipment, I would always recommend having something like a ground lift or this hum eliminator that I'm talking about in this post. You should always have something like that handy because electricity's weird. Everything could be working fine for years, and then one day you just turn on your computer and turn on all your equipment and there's a hum. And you're like, what? Where'd that come from? So for troubleshooting purposes, it's good to have things like this handy. So you might want to just buy one of these or buy a ground lift or something just to have it handy in case you have this weird hum. And it happens to everyone. It's, no matter how good of an engineer you are, sometimes electricity's weird, man, and just problems arise. So, all right. Well, that's that post. Like I said, the link is in the show notes. And okay, this is the last daily good. Well, no, this isn't the last one. Okay, the next one. Harsh critique of a particular episode of a famous podcast. Okay, so I wrote this harsh critique of a particular episode of a famous podcast because I listened to an episode of this famous podcast, and there were I wrote 8 different points here of how horrible this episode was. I mean, horrible. I've never heard an episode this bad, not only in terms of technical production and the sound, but also the hosting and the editing. And by the way, the person who was the famous podcaster, well, he was one voice on the podcast, obviously, but in this particular episode, they had some other guy who was sort of like the narrator or something, and he was exceptionally horrible. I mean, horrible. So I don't know. I don't know if I should. Okay, so let me continue with the background. So I heard this horrible episode, and I wrote down everything I heard that was wrong with it. And because for me, it was almost like an exercise, right? Because I can use information like that for these daily goody posts. And, I'm the guy who has to stay on top of everything and be aware of everything, right? So I wanted to write down everything that I thought was wrong with this episode, and I did. And of course, it crossed my mind that maybe I can send my feedback to the podcast host and tell him, like, dude, this is absolutely horrendous. But of course, I decided against that, because whenever you give any criticism to anybody, they don't like it, then they'll kill you, basically. They'll kill the messenger. You know what I mean? Like, I could give so much constructive feedback to so many different people, and I never give any feedback to anyone. You know why? Because I'm the one who's going to get killed and get canceled and get called the a-hole and all this stuff, right? When all I'm trying to be is helpful. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not saying anything to anybody, ever. Nope, won't do it. Everyone can learn on their own. They can have a horrible sounding podcast for years and years, and then one day they might wake up and say, wow, my podcast stinks. And then if someone ever approaches me and says, hey, I think my podcast really stinks, and could you help me figure out how to improve it? Now that's a completely different situation, right? That's the person asking for help, and then I can just say, sure, I'll help, and then I'll tell them what I need to tell them. But just hearing horrible stuff and trying to contact the podcast host and say, hey, man, this is really bad, you should fix it. I never do that, ever. And I never will, ever. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. But that's just what I'm doing, and that's what I'm going to do. Because I'm not getting involved in that argument, right? I'm just not. So, okay, so let me run through some of the things that were wrong with this really famous person's podcast episode. First of all, the announcer guy, remember I said that there was this announcer guy? His voice was way louder than the actual famous person's voice. Like way louder. It was crazy. Totally had to ride the volume knob. It was way off. It wasn't even close. Okay, number 2, the hosts part were recorded in a reverby conference room, and the audio quality was okay/barely passable. So this is another instance of some famous person who thinks that they can just bring a recorder with them wherever they go and record a bunch of nasty audio, and then, I'll put that out as a podcast. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's pretty nasty, barely passable. And there were lots of loud, distracting thuds and table noises that were horrible, horrible. Number 4, some participants in the room were asking this person questions, but you couldn't hear the person asking the question. You could barely hear them. It was like they were 50 feet away. It's horrible. So it's like, think about listening to an episode where even the host's voice sounds terrible, and now someone in the room is asking them a question, and you literally can't hear the question. So there's like 20 or 30 seconds of silence while this unknown person is asking a question. Terrible. I'm sure people just literally turned off the podcast. They're like, what is this garbage? I can't even hear anything. And they probably just turned it off. Number 5, the announcer guy had zero energy. This was like, he had the lazy millennial. He was a lazy millennial voice, and he had the vocal fry to go with it. He had zero energy. It didn't seem like he cared at all. And I don't understand this. I mean, do people really think that the lazy millennial vocal fry voice is a good voice? Do people think that's a good voice to have? Because it's horrible. It was unlistenable. And at one point, the announcer guy abruptly broke in while the host was speaking. And the announcer guy was like, psst. He did the psst thing. But let me tell you, the psst thing was so much louder than the famous guy's voice that it literally scared me. I'm not kidding. I literally jumped. My body jolted because of this psst was so loud. It was unbelievable. I was literally angry at this freaking podcast because of that, among the other things. And then there was some content stuff. Like there was a time when the announcer guy asked the audience, like, what's your favorite podcasting platform? And what platform are you listening on right now? And like, it came off as a podcast that is not trying to deliver content, but trying to get information from their listeners so that they can market to them better. Like, it just lazy. It to me, it implied that, you know what, we're too lazy to look up the answer to these questions, so we need you to do our work for us. Like, ultimate lazy marketers, and I can't stand marketing people in general, or marketing in general. The people I like, marketing people I like. It's the marketing itself, to me, that is horrible, because you have to be like a crazy, pushy, selfish person to be good at marketing. Because if you're just a normal person, you don't get through to that many people. It's it's people who push and shove and annoy everybody and all that stuff. They're the ones who get through, and it's annoying, right? It's annoying to everybody. So, and over the course of this 27-minute episode, and this is the last point, by the way, over the course of this 27-minute episode, the announcer guy mentioned 3 different times that he's been working with this famous host for 5 to 6 years. Like, he just casually mentioned it 3 different times. It's like, dude, okay, we get it. Like, you're trying to make it sound like you're this awesome guy who's been, being mentored by this famous guy for the last 5 to 6 years. But okay, we get it, and no one cares. And you still sound like garbage. Your energy's garbage. Everything about this show is garbage. Like, so what? We're all supposed to be in awe that you've been working with him for 5 to 6 years. Wow. Horrible. Terrible. And so anyway, with this critique, I don't mean any disrespect. I mean, I'm obviously getting a little riled up telling you about it, because that's just because I'm passionate about it. But, like, I'm not out to disrespect anybody or anything. That's why I'm not naming who this podcast belongs to. So, but anyway, in a perfect world, I'd love to reach out to these people and help them solve all the problems. But like I said before, that never works. All right. Well, anyway, and if you want to click through to that post, it's in the show notes. So recently I posted on social media these 2 different posts that I made. I wanted to just remind you, the top 10 audio plugins for podcast production. And this post is obvious. I actually divided the plugins up into categories, and I picked one plugin for each category. So this is actually a helpful post if you want to look through it. The top 10 audio plugins for podcast production. And by the way, I posted that on August 12th. Since then, I started using a few other plugins, which are not on there. But those new plugins that I started using, they are on this other post, which I call the big list. And if you haven't seen the big list of podcast audio plugins, this is a cool post. And again, the link will be in the show notes. I went through all the different aspects of production and I pretty much listed every plugin I use. And it might even be every plugin I own. No, I didn't include every plugin I own, but at least 80%, which is a lot. So, I go through different cleanup plugins, mixing plugins, equalizers, compressors, multiband compressors, limiters, expanders and gates, de-essers, saturation, exciters, tape emulation, leveling, transient shapers, and monitoring, and also a section that has my current personal favorites. And then I go through a few other things like reverb and multi-effects plugins. It's a huge post, and there's all kinds of plugins, and you can click through links to each and every plugin. So it's a pretty cool post just to reference, like even just to look through it once and be like, okay, it's interesting, because I do have a lot in there. So, all right, well, I just wanted to mention those 2 other posts. And so that does it for the Daily Goodies, but I just want to say a few things. Number 1 is that I appreciate you for participating, for sending me emails and messages and sending me potential guests. So if you know any guests who you want me to interview about their production, let me know. Or maybe are you interested in being a guest? Let me know. Contact me. And again, I would like to thank Daniel Hager for the new website design on my website, podcastengineeringschool.com. Yeah, it's a whole new layout, a whole new look. It's so much better than the old website. So Daniel Hager, thank you, brother. He's the host of Let's Talk Retouching, and he's the owner of Hager Media. And I interviewed him on this show on episode 109. So I'll link to all that in the show notes. And I don't know if you know about our Facebook group, Podcasters Lounge, but we have a pretty cool group on Facebook, Podcasters Lounge. And I used to do live streams on there all the time, once a week, but I stopped doing that. I might start again. One of the ideas I had for the Podcasters Lounge is to have musical artists perform, just to hang out. So all us podcasters, we can hang out together and enjoy some good music. So if you know any artists who might want to perform, do a little mini concert on a live stream, let's do it. Let me know. I put out a new small course about a month and a half ago now. It's called Getting New Clients at Higher Rates. Yeah, so if you're a podcast editor or producer and you want to get new clients at higher rates, this course is like, oh man, it's so focused. It's so, what was the word? I would say it's mercenary. It's so focused and mercenary that because I don't believe in all the fluff. I believe in what works. I believe in what gets you new clients. And by the way, the one main thing is reaching out to lots of people and letting them know what you do in a nice, unobtrusive, non-salesy way. All right. So also, I wanted to give you an update on my songwriting. Well, I've been playing my new guitar. I've had it for a few months now. I've been playing it, writing riffs, and I'm still writing good riffs. But I actually saw this woman who was teaching songwriting. I watched some of her videos, and it's so funny. She actually was talking about how to write songs, and she literally just said it starts with the melody and some words, like even just a line or two. And she was like, once you have a little melody and a little hook with a melody and some words, then you can write the music. And I was like, okay, I've never written music like that. Well, mostly because I've never really been a songwriter and I've never been a singer or a melody writer. I've never been any of those things. I've been a drummer, mostly a drummer. And I play guitar and bass a little bit. So my approach to music was always to write the music first and then put the words on top, right? But the way she was saying it makes a lot of sense, and especially with trying to write like a hit song. If you write the hook melody first with some catchy words, even if it's like 2 lines, if you write 2 lines of lyrics with a catchy melody, that's it. That's the song in essence, believe it or not. Then you can add all the rest. You can add music, you can add other words, and you can worry about writing a verse or 2, right? But anyway, that approach to songwriting, really, I was pretty surprised by that, honestly. I never heard anyone say it like that. So what I'm going to be doing now over the next few weeks is I'm going to try it. I'm going to just with my voice and with my mind, I'm going to just try to sing a melody with some words and then, find something that sounds good that I like and be like, okay, and then use that as the song and then write the rest around it. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but anyway, if you've written songs or you are writing songs, let me know your experience with writing songs. I'm very interested. And the last little announcement is that I'm going to be recording a new episode of The Mystic Show very soon. I've been reading some books, and I have a really cool topic that I want to discuss, but I have to do some more outlining and make some more notes before I record the episode. But if you're not subscribed to my Mystic Show, if you're into spirituality and meditation and really deep stuff, and by the way, nothing having to do with religion and all that, just deep stuff, then you might like The Mystic Show. So check that out if you want. So anyway, I'm happy to hang out with you. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, obviously comment on the episode. Let me know. I'll be back next week with an awesome guest, which at the current moment, I don't have anything recorded. But I'm recording tomorrow, I hope, with an awesome guest. That'll give me a week to produce it, and then you guys will hear it. So, all right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate you. We'll see you soon. Bye.